it was a terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy.
Yeah.
And once you see something that is so the aftermath of something so horrible, a picture never leaves your mind.
At exactly 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995, a Ryder truck parked outside of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City exploded. The 4,800-pound ammonium nitrate bomb inside, made of a cocktail of fertilizer, diesel fuel, and other toxic chemicals, harnessed enough energy to destroy a third of the whole building, as well as taking the lives of 168 innocent people and injuring approximately 850. It is known to this day as the worst act of homegrown terrorism in United States history. How old were you at the time of the bombing, and kind of what was your life like at that time?
Okay, I was teaching English at Cassidy School, and I was 51. And your Aunt Maddie was a senior at the school. So at the time, I had a number of friends who were attorneys who worked downtown in the federal courthouse, which is across the street from the building that was bombed, from the Murrah building. So I was teaching English, and I was in the classroom, and it was a gorgeous day. And I had taken some kids to the library, to the media center at the library, to watch a video. And we were getting set up to watch the video, and the building rattled, the building I was in. And it sounded like the air conditioning unit on the roof was falling through.
It was that loud?
It was that loud. And Cassidy is 6 miles from downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Where the location is, there's kind of a clear view. You know how wide open everything is in Oklahoma?
Yes.
A clear view across the Cassidy Lake, and you could see smoke rising off in the distance. So we were pretty shocked, and I was concerned for the children. Maybe something happened in the building. So there was another teacher there, and I stepped out, and the librarian said to me, "Something has happened downtown," and then it shook again. There were like shock waves.
Mm-hmm.
Then we were told that it was the federal courthouse. Well, it was a federal building, but it was that they thought it was the federal courthouse had been bombed.
So you thought that all your friends were like directly in the bombing?
Yeah. And anyway, so I went back in, and I made a couple of phone calls. Of course, then by then the news was coming out that it was the federal building across the street where the offices were, and that someone had exploded a bomb, and that most of the building was gone.
Immediately after the bomb exploded, people began to speculate over the motive and the reasoning behind the horrific event. Initially, many Americans believed that this was an act of international harm perpetrated by Islamic terrorists, stemming from the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York City a little over 2 years prior. However, once the investigation began, it became clear that it was not in fact an act of international terrorism, rather domestic terrorism.
Nobody knew what was going to happen next, because at that time, Islamic terrorism was on the rise.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, because after the World Trade bombing, I looked into it, and a lot of people thought, initially, oh, it's, Islamic terrorists. Nobody thought it was going to be somebody who lived inside the United States that, committed the crime.
No. And then slowly the news started coming out about how much damage there was, what was damaged. And right away, they had an idea of what car to look for. Unfortunately for him, he got caught the next day driving north by a very smart highway patrolman.
By the next day, law enforcement were able to trace back the Ryder truck to be from a body shop in Junction City, Kansas. This is when one of the identities behind the bombing was revealed, Timothy McVeigh. who was put in jail just 90 minutes after the bombing for the unrelated crime of driving without a license plate but with a concealed weapon. A U.S. citizen and a veteran of the Gulf War, McVeigh had a growing mistrust in the federal government stemming from his alt-right views coupled with the inspiration of the Waco siege in 1993. This siege began when Texas state officials were attempting to get inside a compound which at the time belonged to a religious cult by the name of the Branch Davidians. McVeigh believed that the acts of law enforcement infringed upon their rights and even went so far as visiting the siege as it was occurring. This is when he came up with the idea to bomb the federal building and to get back at the federal government, not caring about the innocent civilians who died, as in his words, they were only collateral damage. Could you, ever imagine that, the place that obviously, you grew up in Oklahoma City, you lived there, you left for a little bit, but then you moved back. Could you ever, imagine that it could happen, in Oklahoma City? Out of all places?
No. Of all places, no. No. Never thought that. Although, this came after the horrible disaster in Waco, which you need to read about. Okay. I was well aware of that far right-wing, scary group of people who would do almost anything,
But you never thought that, somebody could use the influence from Waco and then,
No.
do this? Were you, keeping up with, the investigation?
Yes.
Watching it the entire time, and, what was, your reaction when you were finding out, all of the information about, Timothy McVeigh and just everything that happened?
Just overwhelming shock, I think, at first. And then, and fear that somebody else would do something similar. I think that's definitely was in there. The fear that it would happen again, the fear. There was lots of fear-based reaction, lots of caution, particularly about strangers.
Yeah, I'd assume.
Yeah. And every time you'd see a Ryder truck, you'd want to drive the other direction.
As the investigation continued, it was later revealed that McVeigh did not act alone. Rather, he was accomplices by his friend named Terry Nichols, who, although was not in Oklahoma City at the time of the bombing, helped heavily with the planning of the bombing and also shared many of the views that McVeigh held. There was one more man found responsible for the bombing, Michael Fortner, who was not directly involved with the bombing nor planned it. He just knew about it, and he was sentenced to 12 years in prison and was released in 2006. McVeigh was sentenced to death and was executed on June 11th, 2001, and Terry Nichols was sentenced to life in prison and is currently serving out his sentence in a federal prison. Ever, fear about the future of, the country or, your, city?
At the time, yes, because there were so many rumors. Incredible, the number of rumors, particularly about terrorists,
Mm-hmm.
And when they had McVeigh, when they caught him, and Terry Nichols, that kind of shut down some of that, but the feeling that there were other people like them around. Yes.
It's horrifying, yeah.
Yes.
Did your views of the world change after this event? Did you become more fearful?
I would say much more cautious.
The Oklahoma City bombing was horrific in the amount of casualties and the amount of people that it injured, but it was also able to demonstrate how much a community can come together in a time of crisis and how it is necessary for a community to stick together in a time of terror and horror. Over 12,000 people volunteered to help rebuild downtown Oklahoma, as well as to help rescue people who were trapped inside of the building. And I think that really shows how much a community is necessary in a time of crisis and how much community involvement really does help people that are affected by horrific events.
The amazing thing was how people came together and helped each other. It was incredible. And these children that survived that were so terribly wounded,
mm-hmm.
Were supported, and their families. A lot of things happened. Agencies were established to help people that were offshoots of what happened. I know that Maddie and I took bottled water down any number of times and left it at the site
For the rescue.
To donate, because where you could donate things. And we took, that's my students, once we were back in school, we took blankets and clothes down, because that was, April 19th, it'd still be cold at night. And they were down there working for weeks. And several churches were damaged, including St. Paul's, where I attended church. And I have that pillar when the family contributed to rebuilding St. Paul's Cathedral. A piece of the pillar.
How long did it take to fully rebuild the downtown?
Oh, it was years. Yeah, it was years. They got the memorial. I'd have forgotten the date the memorial opened, but I was surprised at how quickly they put that together.
So you really feel like it created a sense of community?
Yes.
Or at least strengthened it.
It was a real model. Now, the Women's Guild at St. Paul's during the World Trade Center bombing made quilts and sent them to New York. The very people that had experienced the horrific bombing in Oklahoma City had made quilts for the people in New York.
The Oklahoma City bombing is still remembered today as one of the most catastrophic events in American history. A memorial was created in its name on April 19th, 2000, at the 5th anniversary of the bombing, and was dedicated by President Bill Clinton. The Oklahoma City bombing must not be forgotten, even though it is commonly overshadowed by other horrific events in American history, such as 9/11. It still has such an importance in American history. It really does highlight how a community can come together in a time of crisis and can be there for each other and can rebuild a city that was seemingly destroyed by the actions of one man who was acting in a place of hate and had a hate-filled heart.
Hate horrifies me more than anything. I think he was so filled with hate, and that kind of hate is terrifying to me, really terrifying. And it brings nothing but disaster. So if we can work on not having such a hate-filled atmosphere, maybe we'll be better people.